Greetings, and welcome to this, the first and hopefully not the last of my new invention, the speaking on the internet while people listen with bated breath, or SOTIWIPLWB for short. You can also call it a podcast if you are so inclined. One can, of course, reasonably question the validity of a plan to, having grown weary of tapping away on keyboard incessantly, do exactly that to the exact same degree, only now further compounded by having to also go through the tedious process of properly recording my thoughts in the form of audio. One can, but one shouldn't. The topic I have selected to jumpstart this brilliant new plan is one that has been much on my mind for quite a length of time. That is, ever since last Saturday, when me and my dearly beloved, at least one of them, went to see the movie Guardians of the Galaxy. Suggestive tone of voice optional. My general aim is to provide for you today a review, hopefully not to a considerable extent straying from the formula which has proven so successful in my past reviews. Also, I'd quite like to flatter myself. To start from the beginning, what were my expectations? In a word, inflated. Not overinflated, mind you. But how can they not be, when all the reviews my girlfriend read to me described it as the best thing since sliced cocaine? As per usual, such constant praise tends to make me suspicious rather than excited. Was I ever humbled? No, it's a question, because I was probably too drunk to remember. Was I humbled? When it comes to the presentation, it is hard to put into words exactly my feelings about it. You know the last 3 Star Wars movies? Yeah, nothing like those. Special effects galore, but it actually gives me the sincere impression that the aim of the creators of this piece of mastery was for the looks to serve the story. Not, as in the case of the aforementioned, the other way around. Allow me to use the piles of steaming dung that are the newest Star Wars movies as an example. In those, you'll find fascinating twists and turns in where people appear and what they do, all clearly means to an end of providing impressive, sarcastic air quotes, and I do realize I used the word quite wrongly, scenes. Why do they appear on a planet that's essentially a massive global volcano? Because it'll look fucking sweet on the screen. That is a terrible idea. The aesthetics are supposed to serve the story, not the other way around. You know, there is a genre of video where the story exists exclusively to enable the things that look good to watch. Care to guess which genre I'm referring to in this instant? That's right. Pornography. George Lucas clearly looked at Pirates of the Caribbean or Indiana Jones and decided that he'd found the key to unlocking a world of compelling narratives. Also, he's a prick. In Guardians, on the other hand, the aesthetics are part of the story. From the glistening pools of the Nova homeworld to the grimy hollowed-out skull of a long-expired celestial entity, the locales have a life of their own. They don't exist solely to enable one of the main characters to extricate himself from a nostril of the skull to make some retarded joke about snot. Moving on, the plot. It's Star Wars, alright? That's basically it. Unlike the rather retarded displays of pointlessness called Prometheus, Guardians doesn't coyly pretend like it's not based on another story. The clincher? Guardians does a much better job at being Star Wars than the latest current incarnations of Star Wars ever managed to. Which is just embarrassing. What defines a Star Wars movie? Space battles, a small group of relatable characters up against an evil much greater than them, sacrifices. Guardians has all of them, but to not only an equal, but rather to a greater degree. The space battles are rather few, in fact numbering 2 altogether. But that isn't quite the point. While they lack in numbers, they more than make up for in not having Hayden Christensen dicking around. The small group of characters are both interesting and quite relatable, which is something that I have a hard time swallowing from Star Wars, no doubt. The original trilogy certainly had a considerable focus on characterization, and that lended a certain air of authenticity to the movies, but that was over 30 years ago. Guardians, on the other hand, has considerably less meaningless eye-rolling drivel and characters that have more than one identity trait at any one time. And that leads us disjointedly to the characters. Now, my focus is drawn slightly more to two particular members of the cast. While well crafted, the main hero and the genetically engineered raccoon are somewhat standard archetypes, perhaps not all that unique in the grand scope of things. The two that draw my attention were Groot and Drax. Groot caught my eye simply because he is a well-rounded bit of comic relief who, unlike that atrocity called Jar Jar Binks, had more qualities than bumbling about all over the place doing stupid shit and talking like a 3-year-old. It shows that you can have a character the central theme of which is comic relief without having him constantly acting like Monsieur Sillybollocks. I also feel compelled to admit that I found it quite amusing when they took the piss out of Star Wars by way of having Groot say his catchphrase, and coincidentally only phrase, and having the raccoon, the name of which I should mention is Rocket, understanding every single word he said, just in the same way that people did with Chewbacca back in the day. Drax, however, is a whole nother matter. You see, he's played by one Dave Bautista, perhaps more commonly known as the professional wrestler and 6-time world heavyweight champion in the WWE, Batista. What intrigued me was the fact that under usual circumstances, famous profiles known from things outside of big-budget acting tend to get stuck with C-list direct-to-video movies, like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in The Tooth Fairy, or Hulk Hogan in everything he's ever appeared in. Therefore, his presence in such a high-profile AAA production was fascinating, to say the least. And did he ever deliver? I would say without a doubt that his performance was by far the most credible and engaging in the whole film. Not only did he manage to play the character with more than one single character trait, but he also conveyed a seldom-seen degree of character development over the course of the film. All in all, the main characters are human, in the sense of easily identifiable by human characteristics, complex and compelling. They act in a manner that one could easily see an actual human being act. Desperately breaking out into dance in front of the villain to distract him while the raccoon and the wrestler set up the huge gun, that's something I could see myself doing. That is, if I hadn't shat myself in fear long before it ever got that far. Of course, we do have a clear exception in the main villain. He doesn't really have a character at all. He's more akin to a device than a person. If this were Star Wars, which is basically is only better, he'd be the Death Star. Menacing, something that needs to be overcome, but not actually a person in itself. The actor should be ashamed of himself, because he clearly hasn't learned that a perpetual scowl is not the same thing as complex acting. To sum it all up, the movie has so many things going for it, and I think it represents a very positive trend in movie making. It doesn't make half-assed junk and then try to conceal it behind bloom and CGI. It makes really good junk and then conceal it behind bloom and CGI. I hope my next installment will be slightly shorter, because it's a pain to actually, record these. So I, again, don't know why I actually bothered, but here we go. So, thank you, and have a good night.